Onaso. So we continue now with Panchen Rinpoche's root text and commentary. So we just finished the first verse pertaining to the preparation for the Shamatha, and then we continue with the root verse. With a mind that is perfectly virtuous, give yourself over to going for refuge and arousing awakening mind. Then meditate on the profound path of Guru Yoga. After hundreds of fervent appeals, or I usually use the word supplication, they're both fine, your Guru dissolves into you. So one can spend a lot of time on that verse, but I'll try to be very concise. It is extremely important. And that is whether, when you're going into this practice, and you're going to see he's going to be kind of pairing settling the mind in its natural state with awareness of awareness, going to give you choices there. But if you ask, is that practice, is it virtuous? What would you say, Daniel? Just the sheer fact, okay, I'm going to now observe thoughts. I'm going to rest awareness and awareness. What would you say, Daniel? Is that by nature virtuous?
Neutral.
Neutral, yeah. And could it be unwholesome? Could it be unwholesome?
Neutral.
No, but it couldn't possibly be unwholesome? You're right. It's just observing thoughts. What is it? Ethically neutral. But could it be something negative?
If grasping sets in, yes.
Not just grasping probably would be there, but I would say negative. I mean something really negative, karma, afflictive, really going into a bad direction. Kathy, what do you say?
Yes.
Yeah, one could have, this could be a preparation for, using a silly example, robbing a bank. I want to be really calm, cool as a cucumber. I heard from Alan this is the best way to rob a bank. Mind still like an unflickering candle flame. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a stick up, remain calm. I'm calm, you remain calm, just give me all your money. I can imagine that. And so then it's just a preparation for, doing something unwholesome. And so whether or not this is even virtuous depends on the motivation. That's why we're starting with refuge and bodhicitta. Make it not only virtuous, but fabulously virtuous. But also, here's a very important point, and some of you already encountered this. When you go into this practice, either one of them, settling the mind or awareness of awareness, you're going into unexplored territory. Some of you are already finding, this is the difference in my perspective. Maybe I know I'm jaded, maybe the part of my jadedness. But when engaging in philosophical investigation, I've done that, I've written a number of books on philosophy, you don't really find surprises because you're going chuck, 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 with logical analysis and so forth. But scientists are often surprised by what they find. Galileo was surprised to find that there were moons around Jupiter. He just thought there were stars. But then he took a second look, and lo and behold. So scientists are often surprised because it's not just a result of logical analysis. Contemplatives are surprised by what comes up, because it's empirical. This type of practice is not a philosophical exercise. It's much more in the vein of contemplative science than it is contemplative philosophy. And so we're going into uncharted territory, and sometimes, there are demons in there. There are very threatening things in there, unpleasant things, unwholesome things. And so to go in with a sense of security, go in with a sense of security. In the early settlers in America, that's the continent I know best. When they're heading out there, getting to the West Coast, the Oregon Trail, the wagon trains and all of that, the earliest ones, they're going into uncharted territory. And so if you're in a wagon train, you're bringing your children, your family, and so forth, you would like to know that, okay, this can be dangerous. There will be probably times that are dangerous. Do you have a good guide? Can you count on your fellow wagoneers, your guru and your sangha? And do you have good dharma, and that is a good map? And does your guide know the map? And probably it's a he back then, they were all he, but does your guide know the way, And if you have that security, we've come well prepared. Where we need weapons, we have weapons. Where okay, and this is a good guide we can rely on. Then you have the boldness, you have the courage, and a sense of ease that this is not just a terror-stricken adventure, but in fact it's a great adventure. But there has to be some sense of security, some sense of ease, some sense of you're okay. That's what refuge is for. Because this is the path, this is an ancient path. It's a very ancient path, right? Followed not only by the Buddha Shakyamuni, who's explored the depths of his mind all the way down to the ground, but specifically this great lineage of Mahāmudrā and Dzogchen, which is, and there's a whole book somebody wrote a whole book on the Mahasiddhas, the 84 Mahasiddhas, I think it is, or 80 Mahasiddhas. There's a lot of literature out there. And just how did they turn out? You know, Saraha, and Maitripa, and Virupa, and these great Indian Mahasiddhas. And then the great Mahasiddhas of Tibet. How did they did this. They did this much more than we've done this. You know? They'll tell you what they did. You know? How did they turn out? You know? And that gives them confidence. That yes, the path will be bumpy, it'll be challenging, sometimes it'll be very difficult, sometimes quite miserable. But that's how they turn out. And then if you get to meet them in person, people like Yangten Rinpoche, and Benno Rinpoche, and Genlam Rinpa, Lama Zopa, and so forth, boy, that's how they turn out. You know, then it must be worth the difficulties. This is the tremendous value of having a living tradition, that we're not just reading old biographies, but this is still there. So that gives the confidence, a sense of ease, because after all, relaxation, we're going to see from Panchen Rinpoche himself, this great Gelugpa master, he also, exactly in the vein of Mahamudra, you're going to see he's emphasizing again and again and again, relax, relax. How can you relax if you're feeling anxious? If you're fearful, you know, or if you just don't like it, you know. So this is where the refuge, and then the bodhicitta just makes your mind, your heart so spacious that it really does, in a way, bodhicitta is a great method for setting your mind at ease. You know. Then meditate on the profound path of Guru Yoga. After hundreds of fervent appeals, heartfelt supplications, and just giving this a little bit of thought. I mean, it's kind of obvious, really, but why hundreds? Why, if Michelle has some request to put to me, she doesn't have to send 100 emails. In fact, I really prefer you don't. One well-placed email, succinctly put, from a person who's willing to help, and it's an area, yes, I think I can help there. One should be sufficient, and I'm just an ordinary dude, right? I'm not a Padmasambhava or one of these great beings, not even remotely like. But if one is enough for me, then it must be certainly enough for Guru Rinpoche, right? Or Avalokiteshvara or whoever. So why hundreds? And there's a very good reason why. It's not like if this is Avalokiteshvara, this is Panchen Rinpoche. Okay, Manjushri, very major figure for the Gelugpa tradition. It's not like Manjushri, if the prayers of supplication are to Manjushri, and Manjushri, they say, as your yidam, indivisible from your guru. Let's imagine, that's very, very common in the Gelugpa tradition. It's not as if as you're offering your prayers of supplication or your fervent appeals to your guru, indivisible from Manjushri. It's not as if their telephone is completely blocked with other calls. They're just getting so many calls. Every time you phone them, you get a busy signal. Like, try 100 times. Hopefully, you'll get through once. Oh, Guru, I finally got you on the phone. Don't hang up. Don't hang up. It's not like that, right? It's not like that. Okay. So then, why hundreds of calls? It gets worse. You wait, Mary Kay. It's going to get much worse very fast. It's going to get much worse. Why? It's for us. If I can say it's for us, stupid. I'm talking to myself. That we have many desires. Some little bit of desire for reputation. Oh, I wish I'm more famous. Oh, I wish I had more money. Oh, I wish. Oh, I wish. We have many desires coming up, right? And they'll diffuse us in all different directions. Oh, I wish I had a softer cushion. Oh, I wish I had a bit more of this. Oh, and said, oh, and I wish to achieve shamatha, but I'd really like more rice milk. It's a crowded room, the room of our minds with desires. There's all kinds of desires. And so I'd like, I don't want to say anything, you might start giving it to me, but I have a very generous group here, everybody living by podcast, very generous. So I'm not going to say anything at all. I'd like more air. How about that? We have many desires, And if the desire to practice and achieve shamatha is just one of 100, then when you sit down on the cushion, the other 99 will come flooding in as well. And one of the prerequisites, you recall, inner prerequisites of actually achieving shamatha is having few desires. So having 100 is to crowd out all the rest. Especially if there's sincere appeal, heartfelt appeal, fervent appeal. It's that this is my desire. Yeah, I'd like some more rice milk. In fact, I would not actually. Just to make sure you know. I'm fine. I like black tea. It's quite nice. And I have plenty of black tea. But if that's the one that keeps on impinging upon your consciousness because you're arousing it again and again, then when you go into the practice, you remember you're arousing enthusiasm with refuge, bodhicitta, guru yoga, appeals, reflecting on the great adepts of the past and so forth. You arouse enthusiasm and then what? Samadhi. And samadhi, now you just go in and you leave all that stuff in the background, right? And you're just there, right? The chances are then you'll have far fewer desires, other desires arising. Because you've aroused this passionate yearning, this supplication, call for blessing, so many times that that's just filling your mind. It's filling your mind, okay? Like that. So, and then, after hundreds of fervent appeals, your guru dissolves into you. Okay, Mary Kay, you ready? So imagine that you're still reifying yourself, and you're reifying the guru. And then you say, and now, Guru, please dissolve into myself. And, oh man, it's crowded here. It's like having two people in a telephone booth. My skin, I got me and hello, Rinpoche. Can you move over a little bit? I can hardly move. We're both in the same place. Two inherently existent beings in the same skin. That's really tight. So it'd be a really good idea before this. This is Vajrayana practice, of course. That you read as much as you want, as much as you can. Dissolve any kind of reification of self, of your body, your mind, your speech, yourself. Release it all. Release. And so you're still there. It's not like you blotted yourself out, but light, empty, a mere presence, having merely a nominal existence. And then you're calling in the Guru indivisible from the Yidam, the Guru's mind being nothing other than Dharmakaya, Guru's speech being the speech of the Buddhas, Guru's body being the body, the Nirmanakaya. And you're imagining these dissolving into yourself. And they don't say that the Guru comes in and bumps you out and takes over like you've had a Guruic possession. Like you got bumped out and now the Guru, thank goodness Alan's gone, here I am. Not like, billiard balls, when you put some English on the first ball and knock the other one and then it takes over the space. Not like that, okay? It's not like Guruic possession. It's actually tapping into a theme that is very prominent in the Uttara Tantra, one of the 5 works of Maitreya. And that is that the mind stream of every sentient being is totally saturated by Dharmakaya. Every sentient being. Doesn't matter who they are. They're virtuous, non-virtuous. But your own mind stream is already saturated, permeated by Dharmakaya. Where your mind stream is, there is the mind of the Buddha. That's Sutrayana. Sutrayana, right? And so there are, in a manner of speaking, and that's exactly what this is, a manner of speaking, where you are, there's the perspective of Elizabeth, for example, gazing out from a certain perspective. But right there, from that same perspective and gazing out, is also the mind of the Guru. Right? And so that's already true. But it's one of those truths that we're often not very explicitly aware of. And so here's a symbolic act of having generally the idea that the Guru, the Buddhas, are somewhere out there, and we're taking refuge, calling the Guru from afar, that kind of terminology. Taking refuge as we sit in front of the altar and we look upon the Buddha, or a symbol of the Buddha, and taking refuge. It's very natural. And it's not crazy. That when we think of His Holiness Dalai Lama as an extraordinary being, a Mahasattva, and then relying upon him calling him from afar. It makes really good sense. It's not silly. But it's very natural that, in some sense, we do regard the Guru, the Buddha, and so forth as being outside ourselves. That's all very well, but for this practice we're seeking to go deeper and to release the outsidedness, the externality of the Guru, And then this whole sense, it's like pouring one glass of water into another glass of water. That there, as the Guru comes and melts indivisibly with yourself, so that your identity is not bumped out or displaced by the Guru, but your identity is still there, but totally inseparable from, indivisible from that of the Guru. Yeah? And your mind, it's not like you don't have a mind, somebody else, possessed your mind, took over, kicked yours out. But your mind is indivisible, your thoughts are permeated by Dharmakaya. They're still your thoughts, your memories, your emotions, desires, and so forth. They're not somebody else's, but they're permeated by Dharmakaya. If you speak, you're speaking in your language, you're drawing from your knowledge, your personal history, and so forth and so on. But your speech is permeated by the speech, let's say, of Padmasambhava. And your body is your body, it's not anybody else's body. It doesn't disappear, but it's permeated by the physical presence of Namanakaya. What this does, it's very practical. This isn't just a religious exercise or ritual. But you all know now, I think every single one of you, probably everyone listening to my podcast as well, you know very well that when you are settling the mind in its natural state and you're seeing all this stuff come up, and the deeper you go, the deeper you dredge, old memories will come up, emotions, desires, and then something sparks. It can be, especially when you're in retreat. I know this very well. In retreat, you're getting very little input from the surrounding world, but then you maybe make a call to a loved one, or you say, I'll check this email. And then the cascade effect. Doesn't even have to be, if it's high voltage, if it's some big drama, like a loved one has been found to have a serious disease or something like that. But even apart from that, little stuff can just set up such like an echo chamber, after, and get caught up in the dramas of the people close to one's own life. It's very, very natural. But that takes up a lot of time. Because the mind has become very small. The mind is operating only out of our personal focus, of this individual in space, in time, unique, but very, very limited, right? And that means all this stuff becomes a big deal. Whereas from the perspective of the Buddha who gazes through your eyes, well, it's a much bigger perspective. Yeah? And so if you can be viewing it from that, even with just the power of your imagination, whatever's coming up, as if, in my case, my root guru, of course, is His Holiness. How would His Holiness see the stuff that comes up in my life? Don't need to give any specific examples, it's just one more life. But this comes up. How is His Holiness looking right through, as if He was cohabiting, in a very loose, spacious, non-inherent way, cohabiting my perspective? How would He view this? Very differently than Alan Wallace in ordinary mode. Very differently, and much more spaciously. Right? And especially if you think of your guru as not only an extraordinary being like His Holiness, but if you really have very deep guru yoga, imbued with deep wisdom, insight, that you've not just given yourself slogans. And when you think of the guru, you're actually really thinking of Buddha. Then, if you were a Buddha looking through your eyes, what would be your perspective on the stuff that comes up in your life? Very spacious, utterly unperturbed, and yet loving, caring, totally attentive, but unperturbed. So this really creates a sacred space before you go into the main practice. So they can never overemphasize. These simple, that took one verse and I spent so much time on it. But this can be the deal maker and the deal breaker. So a lot of people, when they get into settling the mind as natural state, they just get overwhelmed by all this stuff coming up. They say, I can't deal with this anymore. It's too much. This can be very helpful. So, Panchen Rinpoche, I'm going very slowly here, I'm sorry. Panchen Rinpoche gives a little bit of commentary on his own text. I love it. He says, quote, the mind that is purely virtuous is the awakening mind, bodhicitta. And the profound path of Guru Yoga is a Guru Yoga that completes a portion of the path, an integral feature of the path. This is a summary. The rest is straightforwardly understandable. So he figures, well, this text is not for people who've never heard anything about Buddha Dharma. This is not an initial introductory text. This is for people, at the very least, who are very familiar with Lamrim within the Gelug tradition. The four thoughts that turn the mind and so forth. I mean, the basics are there in all the schools of Tibetan Buddhism. So he's assuming that. Now the main practice. Therefore, having begun with the preliminary stages, I will explain the method for practicing mental abiding. Okay? Practicing shamatha. Now I've modified these verses quite a bit. So I don't know whether they're better or worse, but I'm more comfortable with them. So I'll read it slowly. Without engaging in any modifications due to obsessive thoughts of hopes and fears and so forth, concerning evanescent appearances, settle for a while in unwavering meditative equipoise. Okay? Now this is a root text, so it's very dense. That's what root texts are supposed to be. And they're in verse, not in English, but in Tibet. This is metered verse. So without engaging any I'm going to try to give a brief commentary now, although he's going to have his own commentary, but just so we know what the words mean. Without engaging in any modifications due to obsessive thought. So for other practices, if anger comes up, you do something about it. Apply an antidote. Shantideva has a big chapter on patience. What do you do? How do you modify your mind when it's toxic? With anger, hatred, belligerence, resentment, hostility, and so on. He'll tell you how to fix it, how to heal your mind. You modify it. It's toxic, detoxify it. Very, very good. In this practice, of course, as you well know, rather than being so much a developmental model of trying to transform and develop your mind, you're rather releasing and allowing the mind to heal, to unravel, to unknot itself. So therefore, you don't, in this practice, the specific practice, and this is a great Gelug Lama. There's no way he's refuting Shantideva and Lamrim and all of that. He's just saying this is complementary to all of these other classic teachings for which the Gelug tradition is extremely well known. So without engaging in any modification, not trying to change your mind and make it more wholesome. And why would you want to? Because of obsessive thoughts of hopes and fears and so forth. So these come up, instead of trying to antidote them, remedy them, blot them out and so forth, concerning, and what are these thoughts about? Concerning evanescent appearances, memories, desires, images of all kinds, and so forth. They just come up and go, but then their nature is to just come up if they're orphaned, if they're not, captured by grasping, as many of you have discovered. If you're just resting there in the simplicity, the ease of your own awareness, and a memory comes up, a desire, an emotion comes up, and it fades, it just slips away, it just dissolves away. You don't need to hammer it with anything. It will just dissolve of itself, right? And so they're evanescent. That is, these appearances don't last. Emotions don't last. Desires don't last. Memories don't last. They just come up. They fade away. But when we lock onto them, when we grasp onto them, when there's cognitive fusion, then they can stay for a long time. And they can have a lot of repeat performances. And so, evanescent appearances. This is a very dense, it's classic root text. He's packed a lot into very few words. So in this way, without engaging in such modifications, settle for a while an unwavering meditative equipoise. He just simply said equipoise. Finally, I just wanted to make it very clear, it's a meditative equipoise. And this just comes back to the theme from your friendly balance walla. Equipoise is balance. It's exactly that. It's balance all the way through. And unwavering, unflickering, the unflickering candle flame. So that's how we start. So the practice we did this morning, which really, as I recall, culminated just in settling, that is, body, speech, and mind, and then just resting there for a while. Just without venturing into some practice. I'm now going to start settling the mind in its natural state, or I'm going to practice awareness of awareness. It's just lingering there, having settled body, speech, and mind, and lingering there, just poised, without doing anything. It's a shallow facsimile of Dzogchen meditation. Shallow because it's not imbued with a view. But methodologically, this is very, very close. Right? You're not bifurcating experience into I'm the subject here, there's the object over there, I'm attending to it. Just resting there, open, present, clear, discerning, unmoving, not cogitating. And if you can linger there for a while, then when you take the step to now settling the mind in its natural state, you have a firm basis, a platform of that stillness, which then you will sustain through the whole session. As you are aware of thoughts, images, and so forth arising in the mind, you have a real chance of clearly distinguishing between stillness and movement. If you've drenched yourself, bathed for a while in the stillness, then when you direct that light of your awareness to movement, you won't be so easily immediately swept away. So this is kind of like the moment just before starting the main shamatha practice, the culmination of that initial sequence of settling body, speech, and mind in the natural state. That's my interpretation of this first one. But now we go to the actual practice. Do not cease mental activity. Do not terminate mental activity. Do not try to shut the mind down. Don't just go blank, even subjectively. Don't just go blank. As you know so well now, absolutely crucial to any shamatha practice is to maintain that clear flow of cognizance, discerning cognizance. That's a type of mental activity. Don't let that fade away. As in swoon, as if you'd fallen asleep, fallen unconscious, fainted, or sleep. This is not a trance. It's not anything like just falling into non-lucid sleep or falling into a swoon. Post the century of undistracted mindfulness. So the century is your undistracted mindfulness, and maintain introspection of movement and awareness. So your mindfulness here, well, we'll just let him say. So, but the century is often relating to introspection. Here he's saying the century of undistracted mindfulness, without distraction, without forgetfulness, and maintain introspection of movement and awareness. So introspectively monitoring the stillness of your awareness and the movement of thoughts, the movements of the mind, while your mindfulness remains undistracted, unwaveringly present. But now you'll see what he's doing here. Focus closely on the nature of cognizance and luminosity, observing it nakedly. So right here, he's not going into settling the mind as natural state. There's no reference here in this verse to observing thoughts. Oh, watch this thought, watch that thought. He didn't say that. This undistracted mindfulness is mindfulness of focusing closely on the nature of cognizance and luminosity. Well, you remember, those are the two defining characteristics of consciousness. So this is shamatha on consciousness. And how do you identify consciousness? If you want to have shamatha on a banana, you need to know and you have a whole bunch of fruit in front of you, apples, pineapples, and so forth, and somebody tells you, okay, now focus single-pointedly on bananas, giving a really prosaic example, because this is exactly in the same type. If you've got all kinds of fruit in front of you, and somebody says, okay, practice 5 minutes of shamatha on banana. In order to do that, you have to know what are the defining characteristics of a banana that set it apart from everything that's not a banana. If you're kind of fuzzy on that one, if you're not quite sure, then your practice is going to be fuzzy. And not everybody knows what a banana is. Especially you say it in English. Okay? And so it's just that simple. If you're going to focus on a banana, you need to know what are the defining characteristics of a banana. So when you see one, you know it, and you know it. Right? And likewise, if you're going to be focused single-pointedly on consciousness, and that's exactly what this practice is, you focus on it by knowing what are its distinctive, unique, defining characteristics. You recognize them by way of that, right? If I'd like to identify Maria in the room, well, she doesn't look like anybody else in the room. Normally, of course. But if I'm not quite sure who Maria is, because there's also Maria, and I've known other Marias in my life, but the Maria in this retreat, how would I do that? Not being clairvoyant, I can't just kind of look into her mind and see the Maria thoughts, but by noting pretty much the face. That's the most distinctive thing. We always do that. But Maria's face doesn't look like anybody else's face. And so if I recognize that, it doesn't have to have a list of characteristics, but I've seen it before and I recognize it. Then as soon as I see Maria, oh yes, I can now practice shamatha on Maria's face. Because I recognize it, and there's no doubt about it, that this is not kind of Maria, kind of Mary Kay, and a little bit of Birgit. It's just Maria. So it's that. We by way of the characteristics of Maria's face, then we can focus on Maria. Right? Because that's by way of. Her face is not her. Luminosity is not cognizance. is not consciousness. Cognizance is a feature of consciousness. Consciousness has those two qualities. By way of those two qualities, we identify consciousness. Okay? So that's what he's doing. This is awareness of awareness. That's how he's starting this off. Okay? And so your mindfulness is of consciousness itself, maintaining that in an undistracted fashion. Introspection is monitoring your mindfulness of awareness, noting movement, noise, thoughts, and so forth, but noting also your awareness of the consciousness of which you are aware, and you're focusing on and identifying and knowing you're identifying. I've heard this many, many times. When I practice awareness of awareness, I have this afflictive uncertainty. Am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Am I just sitting here with a blank mind? Or am I really continuing to identify, to know consciousness? And I don't have any trick for that one. It's just come back and see, do you still know something? It's just that. And if you know something, as you've been sitting there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, quietly, because we are cultivating another mode of knowing. Normally when we know something, it is embedded in concepts, language, memory, personal history, and so forth, the whole conceptual framework. And this is, again, I'll just use the same old one, it's just like eating chocolate, it's just the taste, and that's it. And you take another bite, you don't need to think about it, but do you know, without thinking about it, chocolate, 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 chocolate. Yeah. If you know it, then that's cognizance. Consciousness, 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 without having to say any mantra, without reciting anything. Are you continuing to be aware? Let's put it really in ordinary language. Are you continually aware that you are conscious? And now we focus in, are you continually aware of being conscious? Are you continually aware of consciousness? The experience of consciousness. That's it. I don't have any trick, but it is maintaining that knowing. And only you can tell. And so having some uncertainty is good. It keeps you a little bit on edge, so you don't just fall into complacency. But that's how he starts. So I thought it might be interesting here, quite a number of you have a significant background in the Gelugpa. And so here is Panchen Lozang Chökyi. He's just given a classic Mahamudra. I mean, that's just one verse, but this is really classic Mahamudra Shamatha practice. Awareness of awareness, classic. Called Shamatha without a sign, it's called Shamatha without a support. I think it has some other names as well. Sometimes it's called, we'll just leave it at that. But it's classic, it's from the Mahamudra tradition. And yet prior to Panchen Lozang Chökyi, according to Roger Jackson, who's a good scholar, he said he didn't find any other Mahamudra literature in the Gelugpa tradition, including from Tsongkhapa himself. Right? And so is this really an infusion from something outside the Gelugpa tradition, outside the Kadampa tradition? Is he really drawing from something entirely outside of his own lineage, this particular Shamatha method of just resting in awareness of awareness? And I can answer the question. Tsongkhapa. So, in his medium exposition of the stages of the path, the Lamrim Ding medium exposition, there's of course a large section on Shamatha. I've translated it in its entirety with detailed commentary and a lot of footnotes, so it's really quite thorough translation and commentary, explication of the meaning there. It's in my book, Balancing the Mind. And in his presentation there of Shamatha in the medium Lamrim, here's a quote from him, Tsongkhapa straight. One cause, and what he's referring to is one cause of introspection, because this is in a section discussing introspection. In fact, the title of this little section is called The Way to Develop Introspection That Recognizes Them, that's laxity and excitation, while meditating. How do you develop introspection? He tells you in this section. In that section, he says one cause of introspection is to focus the attention on an apprehended aspect, such as of the body of a deity. So recall, you might focus on the coil of hair at the Buddha's forehead, or on the Ushnisha, on the crown protrusion, an aspect of the Buddha's body. So you're looking at the apprehended aspect, and that is an object, a quality of the face of the Buddha. So that'd be classic. Okay, that's one technique. One cause is to focus the attention on an apprehended aspect, such as the body of a deity, you're maintaining that with mindfulness, and as I say later, by triggering mindfulness, that will give rise to introspection as a derivative. Yeah? So that's one way, classic way in shamatha. Focus on some object, image of a Buddha. Or, he says, another cause is to focus the attention to an apprehending aspect, that is from the side of the subject, an aspect of your subjective experience. The other one is the apprehended aspect. This is an apprehending aspect. You may focus your attention to an apprehending aspect such as the sheer awareness and sheer clarity of experience, aka also known as sheer cognizance and luminosity of experience. These, once again, are the defining characteristics of consciousness. So that's Sri Tsongkhapa in his Lamrim. So he's referring to this. He knew all this stuff. He was trained in all four schools in the Kagyu, and he was also trained in Nyingma, as you saw. So he knew this, and he's alluding to this very clearly, that this is a type of shamatha where you're, instead of directing your attention to something outside of awareness, you're directing it, inverting it right in upon itself, and attending to your own consciousness by way of these two apprehending aspects. That is, we apprehend with the facet of clarity, and we apprehend with the facet of cognizance or awareness. And the practice is shamatha focus on consciousness itself. So Tsongkhapa refers to this right here. And sheer, it's tsam in Tibetan, and that is without elaboration, without coating it, without cloaking it in any analogies, language, philosophical speculation, and so forth. Again, just the taste of, let's say, lemonade for a change. Just drink it. And don't think about orchards and no association. Just when it comes in, just drink it. Just that. Stop. Just drink. Drink the lemonade. Drink the Kool-Aid. Right? It's just that. Just that. In the scene, let it be just the scene. When you're aware of awareness, let it be just that. Don't add anything to it. Take it naked. Take it straight. That's what the sheer means. Don't adorn it, cloak it in anything. Then by devoting yourself to mindfulness, as explained previously, because he's already talked about mindfulness, now he's talking about introspection, sustain the attention by continuously monitoring whether or not there is scattering elsewhere. So that's where the introspection comes in. You know what to do. Focus just on the sheer cognizance and luminosity of your own consciousness, but then monitor that flow by seeing, well, when do you lose it? When are you dispersed elsewhere? Recognize this as a critical factor for sustaining introspection. That's how you utilize it, and that's how you refine it. So he's taught it with this extraordinary precision, which is utterly characteristic of Tsongkhapa's writings. So that's in the medium Lamrim. I think I'm the only one that's translated it, so that you can find it in Balancing the Mind. And then there's his great exposition, the Lamrim Chemo. This was translated by a whole team. I was one of the two translators for the Shamatha section. So here he alludes to this again, but from a different angle. I found it very interesting. So here's from the great exposition, Tsongkhapa again. Even those who claim to stabilize their minds without an object of meditation. So there are those who say, well, there's shamatha with a support, with an object. There's shamatha without a support, with no object, right? So there's some who use that kind of terminology. Okay, now you can practice shamatha, no object. He's going to refute that, and now you'll find out how. Even those who claim to stabilize their mind without an object of meditation must first think, as they're sitting down to do the practice, I will keep my attention such that it does not stray toward any object whatsoever. And then keep their attention in that way. There has to be resolve. You don't just sit down and say, don't know what's going to happen, let's see. You're practicing awareness of awareness. You know exactly what you're going to focus on. And you're not going to focus on any appearances to awareness. I'm not going to be distracted elsewhere. In other words, you are focusing on an object. It's called awareness. After they have focused on the mind itself as an object of meditation, they must be certain to fix on this object without straying in any way. Thus, their own experience contradicts their claim that they have no object of meditation. They do. So, some of you already found this out. In fact, it came up in a conversation today. When doing the practice, whether it's focusing on thoughts and images or whether it's resting in awareness of awareness, there's this quiet sense in the background. I'm doing this. I'm doing it. Yeah, I'm doing it poorly, I'm doing it well, but yeah, here I am. I'm here. But I'm here. I'm doing it. So the sense of ego, the sense of self, of I am, of an inherently existent, separate internal agent here doing the job, is not even being challenged yet. Right? And so from that perspective, and then if somebody whispered in your ear, what are you doing? I'm watching my awareness. That's what I'm doing. Shh. Who invited you in here? Oh, it's my guru, sorry. So there is a sense of an object, is a sense of a subject. Whether you're watching thoughts, of course, watching thoughts from afar, we're going to hear that repeatedly. Right? Well, then who's way over here? If the thoughts are way over there, who's way over here? Well, me, right? But even in awareness of awareness, there's a sense of being the one who's doing it. So Dzogchen Rinpoche has been asked, what's the difference between this flat-out shamatha practice, this one, and resting in Rigpa? And his answer, I've heard from, because many of my students are also trained with him, if you're doing the shamatha practice, you're doing the practice with grasping. If you're resting in Rigpa, there is no grasping. So it's grasping, no grasping. And the grasping is exactly of this kind. And that is that bifurcation, dualistic grasping, because that's what we're really talking about here. I'm over here, my awareness is there, and I'm watching it, I'm doing a good job, yep, I'm really there. And you're not saying this, of course, because the grasping doesn't have to articulate itself. But it is that bifurcation of subject-object within the system of there being an observer and an observed, right? That's grasping. It's not something we can simply turn off. Like, oh, I was doing it wrong, I'll stop doing that. And they just go directly into a non-dual experience. That would be very nice, but it's not one of those things you can just stop, you know? And so this is a strategy. That's what this is. It's a strategy. And that is, this is a step on the path to move you in the direction of having a conceptually unmediated, non-dual realization of Rigpa. But we're taking these preliminary steps of shamatha so that we are making the frontal attack, so to speak. When we're ready to cut through to Rigpa, we'll be able to not only cut through to Rigpa, but actually sustain that awareness and not just have a fleeting experience that turns into a great memory. So the fundamental strategy, and we're going to see this in Mahamudra and Dzogchen, is first of all, get your act together, for heaven's sakes. Get your mind together. Free the mind of obscurations, relaxation, stillness, and clarity. Get your act together. Bring a really exceptionally sane mind to the task. So you are resting there. And then bring in the heavyweight, bring in the very deep practice, Vipashyana, to cut the root of the mind. That's a terminology used, to cut the root of the mind, and that is to cut the reification, your own reification of your own mind as the mind of a sentient being, as something separate, something individuated, something inherently existent. As long as that's there, as long as that's unchallenged, whether it's quiet or whether it's quite explicit, as long as that's there, then we do have kind of the joke, you invite the guru in and you're two people in the telephone booth. You're really here, and you're probably invited in a reified guru as well. And it gets very cramped in there, it's kind of silly. But most importantly, if you want to realize Rigpa, you cannot simultaneously be reifying your mind as the mind of a sentient being. No possibility of that. So it does happen for very gifted individuals. They'll go right into awareness of awareness, and they're just like a hot knife through butter, cut right through the mind, right through the substrate consciousness, and realize Rigpa. And with a kind of a boomerang effect, poorly stated, but I'll say it anyway, by realizing Rigpa, then the boomerang effect is, then they realize the emptiness of the mind, and the emptiness of all objects to the mind. It does happen. Padmasambhava refers to it in Natural Liberation. So there are people who are ripe enough They go directly from shamatha right into Rigpa. And then viewing reality from the perspective of Rigpa, then they see this person's mind. Ivan's mind is kind of like this fluff. Oh yeah, yeah, that doesn't exist. Not inherently, that's an empty appearance. Because you're viewing it from Rigpa. And you'll see it in fact as an effulgence of Rigpa, rather than being something inherently existent that's somehow in tension with or contradictory to Rigpa. You know? But for those who are not supremely gifted like that, then the strategy, and this is Padmasambhava's strategy, it's classic, it's Karma Chagmé strategy, he made it so clear in the space of path to freedom. Shamatha, for reasons that, if they're not clear now, there's nothing more I can say. And then the Vipashyana on the nature of the mind above all, to cut through, to see the utterly contrived, conceptually created, constructed, purely nominal. How's that? Purely nominal. Like, who do these glasses belong to? There's a correct answer to that. There's only one correct answer to that. It's true. They belong to me. And why? Purely nominal. Purely nominal. There's nothing more to it than that. It's an agreement. It's a manner of speaking. And we agree, so I still have my glasses. Nobody's stolen them, thinking they were there, or just it was a free-for-all, glasses for sale, or for free. But it's purely nominal, right? And to actually fathom that which we take right to our essence, to our heart, to our very sense of existence, I'm a sentient being. And to see that's as nominal as these are my glasses. Oh, then if you're that far along the way on shamatha vipassana, and you have the muscle of shamatha, not only to get a glimpse of that, but to sustain that awareness that you as a sentient being have nothing more than a nominal status. And what does that mean? You're not even a sentient being at all, unless you're so conceptually designated. These are not my glasses at all. There's no truth to that at all, unless somebody says it. Somebody thinks it. If that doesn't happen without the verbal and or conceptual designation, these glasses have no owner whatsoever. It's just a fact. And of course, I can say, Claudio, you want them? He said, yeah, sure. Then they're his. Purely nominal. So to consider that that is our status as sentient beings, that it's just nominal. If that's it, realize Rigpa. Rigpa's so close. Whereas if you're really quite convinced, existentially, like really, I'm a sentient being, well, then you have Rigpa as a potential. You have a Buddha nature as a potential. One day when you're good, you'll grow up and realize Buddhahood. But you're so inherently a sentient being, for the time being you have no chance at all. So keep on operating out of your perspective of being a sentient being. And check your clock, it's going to be 3 countless eons from now until enlightenment. Operating out of that perspective as a sentient being, that's how long it takes. 3 countless eons. Right? Operating out of the perspective, having dissolved that, having seen it has only a nominal status, utterly empty, and then practicing with your closest approximation of practicing from the perspective of Dharmakaya. Oh, that cuts 3 countless eons down to bat of an eyelash. Boy, I'm going slowly. So that is that. Let's just read a little bit more. I have 30 seconds. Because he's just given a method, right? A very clear, very succinct. Boy, you can't get much more succinct than that. That's awareness of awareness, right? But now in the very next verse, he's doing something else. Whatever thoughts arise, identify each one. Okay, no, that's familiar. Just identify each one. We know that. That's taking the mind as the path. And by thoughts, bear in mind this term thought is generic. It's not just discursive thoughts. It's images, it's memories, desires, emotions. It's all that stuff. I asked Yang Rinpoche about that. You remember? I asked him, when you say namdo, are you referring just to thoughts, or are you referring to all this other stuff? He said, all the other stuff too. Yeah. So it's a big generic umbrella term for the activities of the mind. So whatever comes up in that specific domain of the mind that is uniquely mental, thoughts, images, the domain that's left over when you're dreaming, whatever thoughts arise, identify each one. There it is. And he'll say later, as if from afar. And Padmasambhava says, as if you're a herder, like a shepherd, observing your flock from afar. Same. But then he flips right over again to another method. Alternatively, like a swordsman, immediately cut off any thought that comes up. And he will elaborate on that, so I don't need to right now. But there's another method. There's another method. So one is observe the thoughts. The other one is as soon as they pop their heads up, just decapitate them. They say hi, and they have no head, you know. They said, oh, you know. Swordsman, you know, whatever comes up, they don't get a chance. They want to say something. So where did this come from? This will be the last note for today. And that is, this comes from multiple sources, but it's really classic Mahamudra. Shamatha, it's classic Dzogchen Mahamudra. Dzogchen, Shamatha. And I'm just drawing, just as a reminder from Spacious Path to Freedom, there's just two juicy summaries of this. This is from the Spacious Path to Freedom that we covered last year. And Karma Chagmé Rinpoche is referring to the essential instructions of the Mahasiddha Maitripa. Just let me check that. Of the essential instructions of the Mahasiddha Maitripa. And so Maitripa, and he's summarizing here. But now we've just had these two methods taught by Tsongkhapa, right? Now let's go back several hundred years. It's the same method, back to Maitripa, back to India. So here's and there are two techniques here. One of these is shamatha, in which the attention is focused on conceptualization. Whatever thoughts arise, identify each one. That's what Panchen Lozang said. Now here, in Karma Chagmé, it's straight Kagyü tradition, going right back to Maitripa. In relation to the excessive proliferation of conceptualization, all kinds of thoughts, including such afflictions as the 5 poisons, craving, hostility, delusion, envy, and pride, or the 3 poisons, you know them. Whatever kind of thoughts come up, thoughts that revolve in subject-object duality, thoughts such as those of the 10 virtues, so very nice thoughts, the 6 perfections, or the 10 perfections, just 2 lists. Whatever wholesome and unwholesome thoughts arise, steadily and non-conceptually observe their nature. Classic, taking the mind as a path. By so doing, they are calmed in non-grasping. Clear and empty awareness vividly arises without recognition. You're not caught up in identifying this versus that. Because it's empty awareness. And it arises in the nature of self-liberation. Such that thoughts arise and they self-release, they self-liberate, in which it recognizes itself. Awareness recognizes itself. All the noise dies down. The screen goes blank, or the 3-dimensional holodeck goes blank, and then all you're left with is, as your mind dissolves into the substrate consciousness, your awareness recognizes itself. Again, and this occurs intermittently along the path, not just at the end of the path. Again, direct the attention to whatever thoughts arise, and without acceptance or rejection. Let it recognize its own nature. Rang Nang, they're called. The Tibetans, the thoughts are self-illuminating. Let it recognize its own nature. Let your own awareness recognize its own nature as thoughts come and go. Thus implement the practical instructions on transforming ideation or thoughts into the path. So instead of thoughts being an obstruction, instead of there being noise, you're transforming them right into the path. They are grist for the mill. So there's one practice. He just summarized that in one paragraph. One more and we're finished. Because he gives one more method from Maitripa. And he refers to this as the ultimate shamatha of maintaining the attention upon non-conceptualization. He doesn't say awareness of awareness. He says on non-conceptualization. Whenever thought comes up, cut them down. As soon as they emerge, cut it right down. This is what you're doing here. With the body possessing the 7 attributes of Arochana, sit upon a soft cushion in a solitary, darkened room. Vacantly direct the eyes into the intervening vacuity, the space in front of you. See that the 3 conceptualizations, thoughts of the past, future, and present, as well as wholesome, unwholesome, and ethically neutral thoughts, together with all the causes, assembly, and dispersal of thoughts of the 3 times, All thoughts of every kind, basically. Every thought of every kind without exception. See that they are completely cut off. Whatever thought pops its head up, cut it off right there, immediately. Bring no thoughts to mind. So if they come up, cut them off, and don't add any yourself. Silence in this darkened room. Let the mind, like a cloudless sky, be clear, empty, and evenly devoid of grasping, and settle in utter vacuity. By so doing, there arises shamatha of bliss, luminosity, and non-conceptuality. Examine whether or not there enters into that attachment, hatred, clinging, grasping, laxity, or excitation, and recognize the difference between virtues and vices. So it's stillness and motion. That's the stillness, resting in this utter vacuity devoid of grasping. But should motion arise, motion triggered by attachment, hatred, clinging, and so on, virtues and vices, recognize them by just resting there. And to the best of your ability, you're resting in non-conceptuality. Just a beeline like an express train, going right through, in a dark room, taking no real interest in any thoughts. You just cut them off as soon as they go, because you're in just an express train, going right from where you are to the substrate, like that. So that's got a little bit of the background. I thought interesting. Okay, enough for today? He's so intense. I'm really mellow myself, but Panchen Lozang is so intense. Everybody's laughing here. You people, everybody's laughing at me. I don't know why. There's strange people here. Enjoy your evening. See you tomorrow morning.